And thank you for joining us today live in the Storycraft Cafe. I am Hank Garner, your host, as always. And today I have a very special guest joining us, Brad Taylor, who has a brand new book that just came out last week. It's called The Devil's Ransom. What a fantastic book this is. Brad, I love every one of your books and look forward to this time of year when a new Brad Taylor thriller comes out, and excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Brad, I've got a kind of a fun question that I've been asking folks lately, and I'd like to pose it to you. In your writing career or in your writing life, is there a piece of advice that someone has given you, maybe a really great piece of advice that you refer back to from time to time and you're thankful to have received from someone? Or maybe it's a really horrible piece of advice that you're so glad you didn't take or wish you would not have taken?
You mean as far as writing or
Yeah, as
advice
far
in
as writing.
general?
What yeah, I have lots of advice all around, but, writing or, your creative life, something in that.
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice I'd gotten was I mean, I didn't think I'd have one book published, much less this is my 17th book.
Right.
And when you're writing a series, then things, time goes on. And so the very first book I wrote, I put down Pike and Jennifer's ages and, descriptions and that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And then as time went on, I was like, I can't do this forever. And so I talked to Robert Crace, who does the Elvis Cole
Yeah,
series. And Elvis Cole was, I mean, he was a Vietnam vet, and
right.
technically he'd be solving crimes in a wheelchair right now. And so I asked him, what did you do about that? Because he had the same issue. And he said, I decided to make Elvis and Joe Pike too. I decided to make Elvis Superman. He never ages. I never mention his age ever again. And that's what I'm going to do. And so I heard that and I was like, well, that's what I'm going to do then. So I've never mentioned Pike and Jennifer's age ever again.
That's fantastic. The Longmire mysteries kind of bumped into that a little bit in the books. Walt and Henry were buddies in the Vietnam War, and then when Netflix made the TV series, I think they had to kind of move that forward, and they
Yeah.
were Gulf War.
Yeah, that happens to a lot of movies like Shooter. That
Yeah,
was Point of Impact, and that guy was, a Vietnam War sniper. And when they made it with Mark Wahlberg, he was something else.
right. Well, anytime Mark Wahlberg shows up, it's usually something else. But The Devil's Ransom, you mentioned this was the 17th novel, and 16 of those 17 have landed on the New York Times bestseller list, haven't they?
They have,
That's
amazingly enough.
Yeah, that's an incredible accomplishment. Do you ever look back at those early days when you're beginning your career and think, wow, how did I wind up here?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't, no one's more amazed than I am. I, I mean, I didn't know anything about the publishing industry when I started publishing, and it wasn't until I was probably 4 books in I realized just how incredibly hard it was to get published. Period, much
Yeah,
less make the list. So I mean, I was just kind of numb to it all because I didn't understand.
yeah. You mentioned earlier Pike Logan, who is the protagonist in your books, and Jennifer. For those that are not familiar, who is Pike, and where did this character come from?
He's a counter-terrorist guy. He's well, actually, I what I started out to do when I wrote my first book, I wanted to write a story of redemption. And you Google how to be a writer, and it says write what you know. And I was a Special Forces counter-terrorist guy, and so that's what Pike became. But I didn't set out to write, a Jason Bourne military thriller. I set
Yeah.
out to write a story of redemption. If I'd have been a police officer, Pike would have been a cop. If I'd have been a priest, Jennifer would have been a nun. I was a Special Forces guy, so that's what he became.
Wow. Um, the, one thing that always fascinates me with your books in particular, and there's a couple of other authors who um, will tend to write things that are very, how do I say this, timely feeling without completely dating themselves, if that makes any sense. In The Devil's Ransom, we open up in Afghanistan, and anyone who is paying attention to the news and world events over the last couple of years, there was a lot that happened in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
and we'll leave commentary, aside, but a lot of stuff happened. Um, this is maybe a multi-pronged question, but one, is it ever a temptation to write specifically about something that's going on in the world, or are you of the mind that that's too timely and maybe too raw, and I want to avoid it? Did you ever wrestle with those types of,
Well,
when
I
you're
did
developing a plot?
for this very book. I did. I got a lot of emails asking if I was going to discuss Afghanistan, and I said no
I'm
way.
like,
I
no,
mean,
no,
it is raw. It's raw for me. It's raw for a lot of veterans who served over
yeah,
there. I was like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
right,
But I did follow exactly what was going on over there because I had friends who were doing it. I had friends that were over there doing the evacuation. And I ran across a story about the Bactrian treasure, which is a real thing. And it's this treasure that was found by a Soviet archaeologist way back in the late 70s. They don't even know who was in the tomb. They found this tomb. They know he's rich, but they don't know who he is. And in there was this vast gold treasure, emeralds from all over the Silk Road. So they had like daggers from Serbia and emeralds from China and stuff from Greece and all this stuff. And it became kind of a point of pride for the Afghan people, and they had it in the palace. And then the Soviets invaded, and then in 1989 the Soviets left. The treasure disappeared, and everybody just kind of assumed the Soviets stole it. Said, "We're leaving Afghanistan. Pack that treasure up. Let's get out of here." Well, fast forward 2001, we topple the Taliban, and the about 2002ish, a guy comes out of the woodwork, and he's like the key master for the Ghostbusters key master. He's got this key. He says, "I need to show you guys something," and he goes out underneath the main bank vault in Kabul and opens a vault, and there's the Bactrian treasure. He had hidden it years ago and never told a soul in the Taliban because he was afraid they were going to destroy it, like they did the
wow,
Buddhist temples and that kind of stuff. He didn't tell anybody what he'd done with it, and then he gave it back to us. And it went on tour, went to China, went to Paris, went to San Francisco, New York. This is like a little King Tut tour. Here's the Bactrian treasure. National Geographic was talking about it. Well, then fast forward to our evacuation from Afghanistan, and the Taliban has disappeared again. The treasure's gone, and the Taliban's talking about lopping somebody's head off. And that piqued my interest enough that I said, yeah, I can actually use that in a story.
wow. So when you're, how do you decide what things are too timely and are changing too quickly to like some things, um you may develop a plot point, but then as it plays out in the news, it's a completely different scenario. How do you avoid kind of being um pinned down by the timeliness of something, so that someone could pick up a Pike Logan book 10 years from now and get the same amount of enjoyment without saying, "Oh, well, that didn't happen that way. That's not the way it ultimately turned out."
Yeah, I don't ever try to avoid it. I mean, and it's happened
Yeah,
to me over and over again. It's always a risk because when you write about current events, the problem is they're current, and
right.
something could go wrong. For instance, I was doing 2 books a year for a while there, and by the time I'd finish one book, I mean I'd hit VN, and my editor would say, "Okay, I need the title, jacket copy, of your next book. What is it? What's the plot?" And turnaround, it was so tight, I didn't have anything. And back
Wow.
then, I was still doing a lot of security work, still doing security contracting and asymmetric threats and that kind of stuff. And I said, "Hey, I got this. There's a little known group called the Islamic State. They're getting a bunch of foreign fighters, and it's actually a pretty big threat vector. What I'd like to do is do that. I'm going to put some Americans inside the Islamic State, and it becomes a threat to America because they've got blue passports." He says, "Okay, go for it." Well, halfway through writing that book, the Islamic State became ISIS and took over all of Syria, the size of the United Kingdom.
Mm,
And I was like, "Oh no, we're going to wipe them out now." And that would be the end of my book. I mean, it'd be good if we did wipe them out, but bad for my publishing stuff. It'll
right.
completely destroy my book. And we didn't, obviously. And so it worked out. And then it looked like I was prescient because nobody
Yeah.
had written about ISIS at all until, I mean, my book came out right after when they were front page headline. And everybody's like, "How'd you know? How'd you know?" Truthfully, I mean, there's things that are out there that they just don't make American news. It's when it makes American news, everybody assumes that, wow, it's just happened. But ISIS, Islamic State's been around forever.
Right. Right. One thing that you're kind of known for, Brad, is that you like to gather. You you take trips and put boots on the
Yeah.
ground, so to speak, to gather the feel and little details that wind up in the book. Um, how do you in your fact finding missions, how do you decide what details need to make it into the manuscript, and where does what things are you looking for to make the story feel authentic and to provide reader immersion?
Yeah, when I this book, we went to Croatia. It started out in Zagreb and drove all the way down the coast to every small town there was. And I'm not looking for anything. I have a list of things that I'll do pre-research and say, here's the stuff that I'm going to look for,
Yeah.
as just a set. But that's like 50%, and then 50% is looking for me, and I don't even know it exists. And I don't have a list of I need to look at this, this, and this, and I don't know what I don't know. So when I hit the
Right.
town and start walking around, you start talking to locals. You get a feel for how the locals work. I mean, even things as simple as mass transit. Is it like Japan where everybody fights like cats and dogs to get into the subway, or is it like
Right.
Germany where everybody's more polite? It's all those things are different everywhere you go, and so things are looking for me that I don't even realize are there. For instance, in this book, they had my next door neighbor in Charleston is actually from Bosnia,
Okay.
Herzegovina, and so she knows all about Croatia. And she said, "Hey, you're going to leave Hvar. It's an island. You're going to leave Hvar on the ferry, hit the mainland again, and you're going to be driving down to Brovnik. You're going to pass right by this place called Molly Stone, which is has the best mussels in the known universe. You got to stop there and eat." So naturally, my wife said, "We're going to stop there and eat, and take a picture, and prove to her that we
Right.
stopped there." And as we get there, it turns out that there's two villages. Molly Stone means little stone, and there's stone, and there's little stone. And surrounding both of those little villages from like the 13th century is the what they call, and I didn't check this, but it looked true to me, the largest fortification outside of the Great Wall of China. It's this huge wall that went
Interesting.
around both villages, and you could pay for you just pay them a little pittance, and you can walk all over the walls and see what's up there with the castles and things like
Wow.
that. And as soon as I saw that wall between the two villages, I was like, I'm going to use that in the book. I had no
Right.
idea it existed. I knew exactly how I was going to use it, and I, in fact, didn't use it exactly like I thought at that time. But
Wow.
I didn't know it existed. I just I stumbled on it.
Yeah. Are you a detailed outliner before you start writing the first draft of the book? Do you have a plan that you're working from?
No, well, I do have a plan. I have what I call a framework where I
Okay.
understand the threat vector, I understand the players, I understand the terrain I'm going to be using, but I don't understand. I don't know the tactical nitty gritty of who's going to do what to win where.
Well, the reason I asked that is because hearing you talk about your in-person research, how much of that starts affecting your plan for the book? Or do you go into your research kind of thinking, okay, this is what I think the story, where it's going, and who the antagonist is, and and that sort of thing. And then how much of that changes when you start getting the lay of the land and start picking up the little pieces that are significant that finds you, as you say.
Well, generally, I don't haven't really started doing some in-depth writing before I do the research trip. I mean, I'm working on book 18 right now, and I did the research trip in September.
Okay.
But I don't. It doesn't change anything in the sense there's certain things you're always going to need. There's always going to be something that I'm going to need, and if I see that, I see a piece of terrain that fits it, I'll say, okay, I'm going to take that. There's always there's just unique things that I'll use the book because people when they read a book, when I first started writing, I was doing tradecraft like you'd really do it. So
Right.
if you had a safe house, it'd be a safe house that was just nondescript in the middle of a neighborhood without anything standing out. Well, that's boring. So,
Right.
and, then I realized one book in particular I wrote, and I had a couple of scenes in there from Egypt, is All Necessary Force, and people will email me and say, "Oh, I've been there. I know exactly what you're talking about." And so then I realized, okay, you got to start putting in some places where people, as they're reading it, can say, "Oh, I've been there. I know what he's talking about right there." And so, like the Cliffs Fortress I used, at Mally Stone I used, Marco Polo's house on Corchula, Split, Diocletian's Palace, the cellars underneath Split. Um, and it makes it a little bit harder to, you got to figure out, okay, why are they going into this one specific spot?
Right.
And so you've got to delineate that, but it's better than saying, you went to a house up in the hills all by itself and nobody knew about it. It's nobody,
Right.
it would work for the story, but people get a bigger kick out of, if they've been there, they like saying, I've been to that place.
Technology plays an interesting role in the plot of this book. Surveillance and the idea of ransomware
Yeah.
specifically. Where did that idea come from? Was there like a specific thing that
Yeah.
caught your imagination?
Yeah, so I still get news feeds from all over the world, various newspapers and hacker news and things like that. There's all kinds
Yeah.
of different feeds you can get. And I saw a story about a company in Israel called NRO, which had developed a malware package that it was selling to nation states, supposedly just the good guys. And it's called Pegasus. And the unique thing about Pegasus is it's what's known as zero click. So most of the time you get malware on your computer or on your phone, they do it through social engineering. They get you to click on something that you shouldn't have. So your phone, you'll get a text that says FedEx package is out for delivery. If you didn't order from FedEx, click this link here. And if you're dumb enough to click that link, then now your phone's infected. If you get
Right.
an email that says somebody tried to change your Google password, if you didn't try to change your Google password, click here. That's not. I mean, that's what got John Podesta. That's how he got all his emails hacked through
Right.
Russia. But zero click, they didn't need to do that. And what it would do is turn in any Android or iPhone into a complete surveillance device. They can read the text, they can turn the camera on, turn the mic on, geolocate you, listen to your phone calls, obviously, look at everything you're surfing on the web. So it basically turns it into a giant surveillance device. And they sold it to UAE, United Arab Emirates, which is an ally. And UAE stood up what they called Project Raven, which was manned by ex-American intelligence guys from our own NSA, had retired, now were working for them to create their version of the NSA. And they started targeting dissidents and journalists and American citizens. And I read that story. I was like, that is wild. That's a good story. So I made a ton of research on it. As I was doing the research on that, I ran into the ransomware problem, which is much, much bigger, hugely, incredibly bad. I mean, ransomware is everywhere. Most people don't know how bad it is because nobody reports it. Only about 20% of the people report that they've been hit with ransomware because it's embarrassing,
It's
and
embarrassing. Yeah.
it could cause you to lose business. So if you're a bank
Right.
and you get hit with ransomware because one of your employees was stupid enough to click on a link, you tell everybody, hey, come on, bring your money to my bank. It's really secure. Except we got hit by some Russians yesterday, so
Right.
nobody really reports it. The Colonial Pipeline was reported because that's a commercial infrastructure thing, causing gas prices to rise. The meat packing industry got knocked out on 2 continents. They took out country at Costa Rica for 3 days. And just last week or 2 weeks ago,
Mhm.
the British Postal Service got hit. They couldn't mail any packages. So it's a huge, enormous problem. And I thought, if somebody invented, was able to get past the systems and create a zero-click ransomware set like the Pegasus set instead of social engineering, then we'd really be in trouble. And so that's
Right.
what started the kind of the threat vector I was working with.
It it's really interesting, Brad, because in my experience, when you start thinking about a story, rarely does it come to you as um, y- kind of this fully formed idea with a protagonist and then a problem for the protagonist, and it rarely kind of lays out like that. But you'll you'll read a news article that deals with this, and then you'll have a conversation with someone that revolves around this, and then somewhere in your mind that you start kind of putting the pieces together. It sounds like you do a lot of research and have a lot of information coming in, and you kind of file those things away. Oh, this would be interesting, one
Yeah.
day for this. Or how does when the book process begins for you, how do you start taking these disparate, kind of factoids that you've collected and they start kind of forming a story thread.
It's exactly what you just said. I'll see something stored. So, like I said, I did an enormous amount of research on Pegasus, and I didn't get to really use any of that. The Pegasus malware is in the book, but it's
Yeah,
just a small piece, and it's in the book just to be used simply as the malware was designed to be used. They're going to track a phone
right.
because it's got Pegasus on it. So all the
But you
research I did
knowing
for
all the background information helps in spinning that yarn. It may not come out in the
yeah,
book, but it's kind of it buttresses your expertise in the in
yeah,
the
but the whole Project Raven thing, those
yeah.
guys are real. They got arrested. They went to prison. The American citizens did, and so all that was just like, well, not using any of that. So
So you start collecting all of these disparate pieces of information. Do you start you kind of write out your plan? Oh, I can use this that I've collected. I can use this. And like, at what point in the process do you kind of get the lay of the land and say, okay, now I understand what's happening and where this is going?
when I do my framework, once that framework is done, it's pretty much locked in stone. I've I would say it was 100% locked in stone. And I knew how the book was going to end, uh, except up till No Fortunate Son. Now I say probably 80% of the time I know exactly how it's going to end. But the framework itself, the strategic geopolitical stuff, the
Yeah.
threat vector, what I'm going to use, that doesn't change again. At least it hasn't yet, and I hope it never does, because I'd be halfway through the book, and then obviously I've done something wrong.
How much do you get to kind of push the boundaries of technology and military craft and spy craft and all of that? You there's a particular boundary that you push in this book um, that I was really excited to see. And I'll just say outer space and let you say
Oh yeah.
what you want to with that. How do you how do you decide where to push and what things are plausible and where that line is that a believability that you can kind of put a toe over, or is the general population ready for this? Can I back this up? How do you feel about those types of situations?
Yeah, I think most of it for and I would split that up again into strategic versus tactical. So there's a lot of technology I use that's at the tactical level that is absolutely real. I don't put it's not in there. If it's in my book, it's being done.
Yeah.
For instance, I had there's a billion ways. Basically how you're going to find somebody nowadays through their smartphone. I mean, it's
Right.
just there's so much. I mean, if you look at the murders that happened in Utah, what they do, they track the smartphone. So they've got uh, everybody's got a smartphone, and that's what really is giving everybody away. But that gets kind of boring when you do the same stuff. And so I read a story once again. Now this is when you say you're collecting all these pieces. I'll collect something that it says that's pretty unique. It's tactical. It has nothing to do with the problem itself, but I can use it. So in New York City, when you go, anytime you go into your house, most people, 99% of the people, when you hook up to Wi-Fi, say when I come into home, my phone automatically hooks up to the Wi-Fi.
Right. Right.
Very few people turn on the thing that says, ask me every time before you go to Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I'll let you know if I want you to go on Wi-Fi. So once you have the password to a net, every time you enter that net's Wi-Fi realm, it's going to hook up. Well, these people realize that, and so they spoofed a Starbucks server, and they put it in a drone and hovered it a block away from the Starbucks in New York City. So everybody coming out of the Starbucks, when they got to the street and the red light was there, out of the 30 people trying to cross the street, maybe 10 of them had been in that Starbucks, and all 10 of their phones thought they were back in Starbucks and hooked up to the drone. And once they hooked up to the drone, they drained everything out of it. And I read that and I was like, well, there's a way to find a phone. So I decided to use that. Another thing I didn't read a story about it. It personally happened to me. Anytime you're doing a building assault, you'd really like to know the floor plan. You don't have to know it. We used to train for unknown floor plan because that was the worst case scenario. But if you did know the floor plan, it'd be nice to know. You'd like to know that there's rooms here, here, and here. And I got a Roomba and started running Roomba around the house. Now the Roomba's got artificial intelligence, and the first time it goes through the house to do the vacuuming, it takes it 6 hours because it's bumping into everything.
Right.
Next time it's less. Next time it's less until by the fifth time it's got your whole house mapped out, and that house is a floor plan, and that floor plan goes to the cloud. And that's when I quit using the Roomba, because now all you have to do is hack that cloud, and I've got the floor plan for your house if you've got a Roomba.
Wow.
And so I ended up using that in a book. That wasn't a story I read. I just saw what the Roomba was doing. It was like, man, if I wanted to hit a house and they have a Roomba, I'd hack that Roomba and figure out what their floor plan is.
You know, this is the crazy thing, Brad, is that the things that make life uh, simpler, we feel like are these gaping security holes in our life. You know, the more you learn about the vulnerabilities and the holes that we're leaving in our life, the more it just makes you want to go live in a cabin in the mountains. You know,
Yeah. So I've used Alexas before because you can hack them,
right?
turn them into listening devices. They actually had there was actually a court case where a guy murdered his wife, and they think the Roomba heard it, and so they got a subpoena to get all the not Roomba. They think Alexa heard it, so they
Right.
got a subpoena to get all the data from that Alexa. And sure enough, the recording of him murdering his wife was on the Alexa.
Oh, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Um, Brad, with a character like Pike Logan, who is a long running character, um, in a series of books that are so edge of your seat, you know, the stakes are extremely high. Um, how do you maintain that level of vulnerability for a character and keep your reading audience invested in a character when we kind of expect that we're going to see Pike again next year? You know, like I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure in the Pike Logan series you're not going to kill Pike. So
Don't be so
what
sure.
other well that you know we don't know that, but you know we hope that. What other ways have you learned as a writer to keep me as a reader invested and to keep me worrying about Pike for lack of a better term enough to keep coming back to visit him?
Yeah, I think it's for me. I have a whole team there, so it's
Yeah,
Pike, Jennifer, Veep, Knuckles, Brett. There's a whole bunch of people. Aaron, Shoshona, and combat is unforgiving. I mean, you could be the best commando on earth, and you're going to bleed just like anybody else. And so I've had some guy. I wish I after I did it, I really wished I hadn't. I've had characters die, and they weren't the red-shirted Star Trek lieutenant who shows up on one episode, and he's the one that's going to. As soon as you see him, you're like, he's dead.
right, right.
No, this guy had been in multiple books, and it was Decoy, and I had spent a lot of time developing him, and it worked really well for that book. But afterwards, I was really wished I hadn't have done it. Somebody, well, it's kind of a spoiler. Somebody gets hurt in this book. How about that?
Love it. Well, this book is The Devil's Ransom. It is available everywhere now. Brad, I love this book. I look forward to a new Pike Logan book every year. If folks are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, where can they find out more about this series and this character or these characters? And where can they find out more about you?
They can go to my website at bradtaylorbooks.com. And actually, that's a good segue. So yes, I have excerpts of all of my books, so you can get a flavor for any book, including Devil's Ransom. Its first few chapters are on there, so you can see what the writing's like. But that's also where I have a national security blog, and it's also where all the other books are.
Excellent. And we'll link that up in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find you. The Devil's Ransom, available everywhere now. Brad, thank you for joining me again and for talking about the new book.
Thank you for having me. It's fun.